Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Almost 20 years ago now, I was a brand new college student and poor. Because of that, I found what I thought was a perfect living arrangement. I moved in with two couples in a 3-bedroom apartment for the purpose of splitting everything 5 ways and thus be super affordable. I liked the people I was moving in with, and I figured it'd be a great idea. Boy, was I wrong. Nothing of them had credit worth a damn. So utilities and DSL were in my name. Also, the lease was limited to 3 people, even if we were planning on having more than that. The landlady was super chill and she didn't care. These apartments were really crappy to begin with. So at first everything was great, cheap bills, private rooms, no worries. I like to cook, so I did most of the cooking in the apartment. I tend to wash the pots as I go, so I didn't really realize that I was the only one cleaning the kitchen. At first, I had the master bedroom and a private bath, so I didn't realize that the shared bathroom wasn't getting cleaned. Halfway through the year, the roommates voted, and since I was the only one without a partner living there, I shouldn't get the master all to myself. I was young, and I thought that this was how things were done. So I agreed. Major mistake. Things went solidly downhill from there. I was the only one cleaning, and I would ask repeatedly for help. Occasionally, someone would vacuum the front room. Then even that stopped. At the time, my partner lived much closer to my job, so I would more often than not end up staying over there. And since I wasn't at the apartment much anymore, no one cleaned anything. The kitchen quickly became unusable, the carpets literally changed color, and there were ants infesting the couches. Cockroaches would literally scurry out of the room when the lights came out. It was vile. I wasn't there much, and when I did come home, I went straight to my spotless room. I stopped showering at the apartment and eventually stopped even using the toilet in the restroom. Then the roommates voted again. This time they wanted to move another couple in, and they voted me off the island. That was the last straw. I was pissed. I felt betrayed. I wanted revenge. I no longer cared about these individuals as even human, much less as friends. So I acquiesced. I quietly agreed to move out, and later that night I went through and took photos of the apartment. Every room but mine was utterly filthy, and it was painfully obvious that I had been the only one taking care of the place. The next morning I woke up, packed all my meager belongings into my dad's van, and I moved out. I also took the roll of film that used to be a thing, I promise, containing all the pictures of the filthy house to Eckarts. 2 days later, I went back to the landlady and gave her the photos. I also told her about how many people were living in the apartment and how they wanted 2 more people to move in. She was less than thrilled. She thumbed through the photos and then signed my name on the lease. While sitting there in the office, I also called the utility and phone company, closing my accounts. Yeah, I took a hit in that month being the only one paying it, but what the hell, right? They turned off the power within an hour of my call. Now the roommates have no power, no phone, no internet, and a very neatly worded eviction notice on the front door. Update and clarification. They did beg me to turn the power back on, and they threatened not to pay their part of the bill that was owed until I did that. I did not. They could not cough up the $400 deposit they needed to get it turned in their name, and I was out $100 or so in the money they owed me for my part of the utility/phone bills. I did not get my security deposit back from the landlady. It was part of my agreement with her. She let me out of my lease. I signed over the $120 or so to her without a claim. All in all, I lost $220, some pots and pans that were so gross I didn't want to clean them, and my own place to live. But I did not get evicted or have to live in filth anymore. They lost their home and most of their furniture. The furniture was lost because it was filthy and rotting. I heard that one of them moved back in with their parents and stayed there for almost a decade. Another got someone pregnant, and they were living in a crappy trailer on her dad's land out in the middle of nowhere. I don't know about any of the others. I know the eviction went through, but I don't know what the monetary cost ended up being, though I did hear that one of them was whining about the monetary judgment against them. Their credit was terrible, so it could have been the eviction or other creditor. I have no idea. This all started several years ago during my parents' divorce, but the revenge took place this November. Backstory. Growing up, my father, who's an emotionally abusive piece of crap who got off of religious authority and controlled every aspect of our lives. We were kept so isolated and made to fear the police/CPS to the point where we thought it was normal. After I went off to college, my little brother started pursuing stuff my father didn't like, and my father started beating him, unbeknownst to my mother and I. When my brother threatened to tell my mom about this, my father kicked the then 15-year-old out of the house. My mother was understandably horrified by this and tried to get my father to see sense, at which point he started hitting her. Long story somewhat short, I got my mom out, my brother went to live with friends, and divorce proceedings were started. It was nasty. No one wanted to go to the police. Father was friends with the local small-town cops, and thankfully my jerk sperm donor agreed to a no-fault divorce. While my mom was cleaning out her stuff from the house under the watchful eye of her amazing co-workers, she found my father's discharge papers. This is where the plan started. You see, my father spent his entire 25-year marriage telling everyone that he was a Special Forces vet who had been awarded the Purple Heart and Bronze Star, which were both coincidentally destroyed in a house fire along with all his uniforms and paperwork. But here were his discharge papers, and they clearly stated he was given an other than honorable discharge after 4 years in the motor pool. Not wanting to be seen as a vindictive ex-wife, my mom quietly took the papers and didn't tell anyone for years after my father moved away to a new state to join a militia. When she finally told me while tipsy this past year, we hatched a plan. Over the next few months, we snooped on social media to make a list of his former and current employers, family, major friends that we knew of, and his new church. She enlisted our extended family and my college friends from all over the country. In November, we each purchased Veterans Day cards and wrote out messages such as Stolen Valor, Motor Pool, Pretender, and so on. Everyone attached a photocopy of the page listing his discharge, and then we sent him on the same day from the nearest major cities with a return address listed as his current church. They arrived on or around Veterans Day from Atlanta, Orlando, Washington, D.C., New York, St. Louis, Kansas City, Seattle, Portland, L.A., Houston, Ontario, London, and Edinburgh. Immediately, my mother was inundated with calls, emails from people who had no idea and couldn't believe he would lie like that. They were sorry for not believing her/my brother. My jerk dad sent a nasty email implying horrible things if he ever could prove my mother did this, which she forwarded straight to her lawyer along with the nasty letters from his more vocal supporters. Now, most people in our hometown look at her as the battered spouse who walked out with her head held high. My little brother has no idea we did this. He didn't want anyone to confront my father, but later told me he got a random call from our old pastor apologizing for kicking him out of the church over my father's lies. And I can finally sleep well at night with the knowledge that his reputation is in shambles by our hands. Revenge truly is a dish best served cold. This isn't my pro-revenge, but my father's, who escalated his pity revenge to all-out professional. Years ago, my neighbor was trying to sell his house during the fall, and he was selling it for incredibly more than it was worth, almost 6 figures higher. To make the property seem worth that figure, he would wake up early in the morning and take a leaf blower and blow the leaves past his front lawn into our backyard and then some, making it seem like his front yard went all the way to our driveway and also included our beautiful tree older than all the homes in the area combined. We never had a backyard fence because his kids were my age and we'd all be playing on a swing attached to that tree together. We were all cool. My dad wasn't too keen on this because he didn't want to get in a property dispute with a new owner, so he found the official property lines and guess what? His front lawn ended about 3 feet from his house. So my dad bought some little sticks with orange ribbon and hammered them into the ground to show where the actual property line was. Next day they were gone, thrown into the woods that surrounded us. My dad fetched them, nailed them back in, and knocked on the door asking him to cut the crap. Next day gone, once again, with a passive-aggressive note on our door. My dad is a rather intimidating guy when frustrated, and he was apparently too scared to be confrontational. The note was saying that we needed to just be cool with it and let him do his scam so he can sell the house. My dad then decided to up the ante and went to a hardware store and bought 4 12-feet iron rods. Took out his ladder and used the backside of an axe to nail it about 8 to 9 feet into the ground, and then watered the grass or did something so it couldn't just be yanked right out. So now, there were just 4 ugly rods poking out of the lawn with bright orange ribbon tied to the top. My family went away for a weekend, came back Monday, and all 4 are gone, tossed into the woods in our backyard, and those 4 spots are trashed with little holes from when he spent hopefully a long time digging those bad boys up. Obviously, my dad was furious and he just silently stood there for about 20 minutes with a burning rage deep inside, and our entire family could see him scheming. He turned around, hopped back into the car, and disappeared for hours, only to return with a tow truck coming behind him. He popped over to a junkyard, found essentially a frame of a car and bought it for its worth in metal, and then had it shipped to his backyard, which he plopped just before the property line. My dad walked into our house like a great conqueror, saying, "Let's see you throw that into the woods." The neighbor showed up later that afternoon, followed by prospective buyers who just stood in his driveway, gawking at the junker 4 feet from the house. He tried to brush it off, and as soon as they left, he came over just yelling about how he was going to call the cops on us and Home Association for depreciating the value of his property, to which my dad said, "Sure, go ahead, and I'll let them know about what you've been pulling for the past few weeks." Eventually, they came to the agreement that the junker would leave the yard if he paid to have it removed and shipped away. And ever since then, he stopped messing with the yard and stopped messing with the leaves. In 2012, I traveled from Australia to the US to visit some long-time friends. One of them was currently studying law at the time, and he was invited to a house party with his other law buddies. I tagged along, and the night was young and everyone was just having a drink. The usual banter and mostly talk about law crap. I really had no idea, but a few of these guys were talking about one of the men, 5'4" Pac-Man at the party, who apparently sold LSAT test answers for quite a lot of money. Later on in the night, they started a private cash table poker game, and as a quite savvy person to poker, I asked to join, and there were no issues. We were playing a hand and the pot had built up. I chucked in all the cash I'd had and my expensive watch. It was just me and 5'4" Pac-Man. There was $5,000 in the pot, and I had a 4 of clubs and a 2 of clubs. The river card had just come down, leaving a pair of 2s, a pair of 4s, and a river card being a king. I had a full house. I was very positive I'd win. But when it came time to reveal cards and I revealed my hand, the 5'4" Pac-Man I was playing against laughed and revealed his hand. He had pocket 4s, giving him 4 4s, which didn't make sense because there were only 4 4s in the pack and this pack had 5. So basically, I've been playing and I didn't have my blue eyes white dragon. In a small outrage, I announced he was cheating, to which he took the entire pot and said, "What are you going to do about it? Our place, our rules." To which all his mates gathered around him, and I'd just been left short out of cash. I was then kicked out pretty quickly. My friend that I came with caught up with me and apologized and said he didn't know that would happen. But I had another idea in mind. Early in the morning, I got up, left the place we were staying, and made my way down to the local payphone. Called the closest law school I could determine and anonymously tipped off that a person by the name 54's Backman had been boasting about selling LSAT test answers. I provided the address we went to. The call was short, and I went back to the place I was at and then flew home a few days later. About 3 weeks later, I got an email from my friend that I visited in America saying that 54's Backman had been arrested for suspected selling of answers to the LSAT tests. 6 months later after that, it was apparently found that he was a liar, and what he'd been selling people was just absolute rubbish answers to the apparent test. He was kicked out of the house he was in and apparently poor as hell, roaming the street. I don't know if he got any criminal charges. This is a story from my high school years. Now, before I write anything to my American readers, before you start explaining the law to me and calling my story fake, I want to emphasize this is Africa. We have rules, we have laws. But unless you're murdering someone, they are really more just guidelines to follow than anything else. Heck, what am I saying? I know a guy that had his friend stabbed to death in a pub. The stabber got set loose, was about $28 bail, and just never appeared in court again. So murder really isn't that big of a deal either. So a brief backstory. They are not really crucial to the plot, but it paints a nice background. Any of those that read about my evil stepmother knows that by the age of 14, I was living alone in my father's house and making a pretty comfortable living renting out his rooms to students. Therefore, needless to say, for me high school was a blast. Now, I am not going to lie and say I was a good student. I was anything but. I never drank or smoked, but I skipped school almost more often than I attended. When I rarely did show my face, I'd often just go sit in any class that I felt like, whether I took the subject or not. Sometimes I'd just go to school for recess and go home again after. I was really living the dream of any B-average student. What's more, I hardly ever got in trouble. Even when I got caught, the teachers would kinda just brush it off and let me get away without so much as a slap on the wrist. Most of the teachers either loved me or had long since realized there really was nothing that could be done about me, so they mostly just humored my antics. There was, however, one teacher that saw through my charms. He was a first language teacher, never my favorite or anything, but I truly held no ill will towards him. In fact, I kinda respected him for being the only one that actually bothered calling me out on all of my crap. Although this seldom did him any good, because whenever he threatened to call my parents, the obnoxious kid that I was would just ask him, which parent? My mother in heaven or my father somewhere in Africa? If you manage to reach either of them, could you please ask them to check in once in a while? And this would kinda be the end of the conversation, because as arrogant as I was about it, my argument wasn't untrue. On to the day of the actual story. I was in my senior year and still attending classes on an on and off basis, but attending more than I did in the past. I was trying to change my ways or anything, but I was in the process of putting together a 4-hour-long video of our high school years and realized I had skipped so much that year that I hardly had enough footage to use for that segment. On this particular day though, I had picked the wrong day to attend and ended up having to attend assembly. This did not sit well with me, and I had a personal gripe against our school principal for something that had happened in my sister's senior year, and therefore I refused to show him any kind of respect. He later got canned for having an affair with a PE teacher. Now, as arrogant as I was, I do maintain that I wasn't actually talking as loud as a language teacher accused me of, but I will openly admit that I wasn't paying any attention to the principal's speech, because I hadn't done so in 4 years and definitely wouldn't have done so that day. So maybe I was, who knows. He wasn't an unfair teacher or anything like that. Nonetheless, the language teacher pulled me out of assembly and forced me to go stand outside. So I stand there waiting. Several teachers pass me. One asks why I am not inside, and I answer that the language teacher kicked me out. They say, okay, and continue about their business. Later, the assembly ends, the students exit, and I'm kind of standing there waiting to be called to the office or just for some kind of consequence, but nada, nothing, zilch. So I walk back to class thinking, that was freaking awesome. Cue the malicious compliance. So the next week rolls around, I decide to attend school that day, assembly time comes, the other students enter, and I hang back, and when the doors close, I'm still outside. I hang around again, later a passing teacher again asks why I am not inside, and I once more answer that the language teacher sent me out, and she again walks away without saying another word. The next day I do the same thing, but this time instead of hanging out where the teacher told me, I just take a leisurely stroll outside, getting fresh air and an extra long recess, while the other students are stuck inside that boring assembly. A week later I got extra ballsy and invited a friend to try it out with me, and he agreed. And when the bell rang for assembly, we both just hung back while the other students entered the building. So now I actually had company for this extra long recess. This was like the best discovery ever. Needless to say, I never set foot inside the assembly hall again. I wish I could say the same for my friend, but after 2 weeks, he had grown paranoid and started attending again. Chicken. I would have loved to have ended this story by saying that the language teacher eventually caught me and I could have told him that he was the one that sent me out, but that moment never happened. Even though I was in the wrong and I knew it, I still would have loved that argument. Just a brief epilogue. The language teacher actually ended up marrying one of the girls in my class. Yes, I thought it was weird too, but he wasn't that much older than us, and I was very close to her sister. So him and I had a nice chat at his sister-in-law's wedding, and I apologized to him for being a jerk back then. So we're cool today. Not mine, but my cousin's story she recently shared with me. Background: my cousin, her wife, and their 2 kids lived in a rented apartment along with 5 other resident units in a European country. It's not completely upscale, but it's definitely not slum. And it's a really beautiful place. And by lived, I mean that their landlord decided to evict as many residents as he could, so he could renovate and bump up the rent by 3 times. Pretty crappy. This all occurred starting back in September. Now, Scumlord, as my cousin passionately called him, he tried to keep it a secret, but another tenant, who did work on the apartments for a reduced rent, found paperwork when he was fixing a broken window at Scumlord's residence, a very, very nice house, and he shared it with the other residents because that paperwork was drafts of eviction notices for random things. Example: pictures of the residents of apartment 3 have been leaving garbage in the hallway. According to my cousin who lived in apartment 3, they kept finding bags of garbage outside their door. Not theirs, but ones full of fast food takeout and very unsettling magazines. My cousin is vegetarian. She and her partner try not to eat takeout. It's definitely not their garbage. But back to the story. Basically, my cousin, her partner, and the other residents came together in their courtyard and realized that their landlord was faking these sorts of things to get them all evicted, with photographic evidence. None of them were very happy, especially since one apartment was apparently being rented by couples who just had their first child. Another held an elderly couple who had nowhere else to go. 3 families, including my cousins, who've been living there for over 10 years, and a maintenance guy who couldn't find anywhere closer to work and didn't have a car. And rent prices were already skyrocketing. These guys literally had nowhere else to go. Of course, they found this out while Scumlord was out of town, so they couldn't confront him. As they were stewing over this, my cousin's partner, let's call her Allie, had an idea. She and my cousin had been planning to repaint their living room because the paint was peeling. As Scum landlord had said in email, paint it. He didn't specify how it was painted or what color was used. Allie suggested that they all get permission to repaint their places. in horrendous ways, then move out quickly. Everyone except the older couple jumped on board, which, as my cousin explained to me, they didn't want to start the fight in a losing battle. The older couple later managed to move into a retirement community that one of the families found for them to go to. Anyways, the rest of the residents agreed to it, as Scumlord was sent email requests for repaints, and he basically said go for it in each one. I guess he thought he could get free paint jobs done from them. So while juggling their normal lives, my cousin's family and the other 4 units all have to find new places, start packing, set up everything for the painting, and repaint their walls. My cousin decided to be extra vindictive and buys a crap ton of black paint, along with varying neon colors. She and Allie then painted on as many layers of black paint that they could, after using primer of course, in every single room. Even the bathrooms and ceilings weren't spared. They finished in about mid-November, and they then let their kids 5 and 8 loose in the neon colors. I am talking handprints, random swaths of paint, got footprints on the ceiling, and just every random thing those kids wanted. According to my cousin, was a glorious, horrific disaster. She told me there was even a butt print, though she could have been exaggerating. She didn't know what the other places were like, only hearing that maintenance guy painted rainbows everywhere, that the family in apartment 5 had just thrown different colored paints on the walls at random. Thankfully, they, cousin's family, managed to find a place before Christmas, which was smaller, but it was in a good area of their town. They sent their move-in notice and booked it. 2 weeks later, after they settled in their new place, Scumlord was blowing up their cells. He was pissed by all the new looks. He then wanted to sue them and threatened court. Cousin and Allie obliged. Court day came and Scumlord actually had a lawyer and was suing all 5 of the former resident families at once. He claimed a whole bunch of crap, including all the reasons for the evictions. Maintenance guy destroyed them, provided proof about the fake eviction evidence. Apparently, some of the garbage included receipts from Scumlord's own purchases. Bad damage to the sink in apartment 6 was actually from Scumlord trying to fix it and so on. And they all provided the email printouts of the paint requests, pointing out how Scumlord never specified how it was to be painted or the colors. The judge threw Scumlord's case out and ordered him to pay restitution for damages. My cousin's family got the restitution and she watched in glee as Scumlord struggled to undo the paint damages before apparently giving up and trying to sell the building. So far, there have been no takers. Edit to clarify. Former tenants want nothing to do with the old apartment anymore. And as for repainting, I wasn't kidding when I said a crap ton of paint was bought and used. According to my cousin, they painted in so many layers that every wall was over an inch in thickness, and the ceiling was centimeters. So imagine trying to clean up all that, and Lord knows how much paint was applied in the other units. Again, this is what my cousin told me. She may probably have exaggerated the paint thickness since she didn't have a way to actually measure, so I'm only going on what she's told me. I'll try to call her back, but there is quite a difference between our time zones, including the ocean. As for that nice house, anything that isn't a rental unit and is decent enough is a nice house to her. So it probably wasn't a fancy place Scumlord was staying in, but probably something he bought way before housing prices started to skyrocket. Grams had just moved into a retirement park with a lot that backed up to county land that was a nature preserve. His backyard was basically non-existent, but he didn't mind as he got to look out over the preserve. However, he did marvel at how his next-door neighbor's backyard extended a good 8 feet past his, giving the neighbor a nice space back there. Grams tried to be friendly with all his new neighbors, exchanging phone numbers and the like. And one day he noticed the next-door neighbor was putting down expensive pavers that extended from his back door all the way to the old fence posts that designated the preserve boundary. Grams watched the neighbor yank the 3 rickety fence posts out of the ground and move them back an extra 2 feet into the preserve before bounding them back in. Then started to clear the land, intending to gain himself more area for his pavers. Grams used to work for the National Park Services as a young lad, so he thought he had better warn his neighbor of the consequences of his actions. So he heads out back for a little chat. Neighbor is immediately defensive, and before Grams says much, neighbor tells him, "You're new here. I've been here 10 years. And to mind your own damn business." Grams decides not to press the issue. Nothing happened that year, but the following year, when most of the park emptied out to head north of the summer, the county came by to check on the preserve. Grams notices them going back and forth behind his neighbor's house. The workers are pulling out maps and taking photos and making phone calls, and soon more guys show up. Turns out the neighbor had moved the posts several times over the years, and in reality his backyard is supposed to be even smaller than Grams' backyard. To make it worse, the neighbor put pavers in the back specifically to park both his golf cart and the cherry red sports car back there for the summer, so the county will have to move them before they can do anything else. They tape a notice to the front door and they leave. Grams goes over to read it, and it states that neighbor was in violation of encroaching onto protected lands. He had 30 days to move his car, tear up the pavers, and pay a fine of $11,000 because of damage to endangered species who inhabit the protected lands, as well as trespassing fees. Failure to do so within the 30 days will result in the golf cart and the car being towed and impounded. Pavers will be dug up and carted off at neighbor's expense, and the fine will increase for every additional day past the deadline. 30 days comes and goes, so a week after that, Grams has quite the show, as first the car and cart were towed. Pavers were dug up and hauled off, and the old fence posts and ropes were replaced with metal posts embedded into buried cement bases, connected by steel cables. Whole process took several weeks to finish, but the preserve looked a lot more legit when they were done. A few solar cameras were installed so the county could monitor the wildlife and encroachers remotely. Meanwhile, more notices were taped to the front door of the neighbor's house. By November, the snowbirds were flooding back into the park, including neighbors. That was Grams' second show of the summer, as neighbor read all the notices, digging down until he reads the first one, then runs out back and starts screaming and cussing up a storm before running back to his car to dig out his cell phone so he could call the county to find out where his car and golf cart were. Grams stays indoor to avoid the guy as he's frantically trying to unload his car, turn on his water and electricity, get the AC and toilets going, and all the while trying to get someone at county to pick up the phone and give him some answers. He finally gets a live person and proceeds to scream at them while on speakerphone about his car and cart. So the call keeps getting kicked to other people because who wants to help a screamer? Basically, the neighbor is told to come to the county office to get this straightened out. 3 days later, the neighbor catches Grams outside and asks if he was here when the county stole his car and destroyed his backyard. Grams said he was, and the neighbor said, "Well, why didn't you call me when you saw them putting notices on my door? You had my number up north." Grams said he had thought about doing that, but figured the neighbor would prefer him to mind his own damn business. So he decided against it. This happened last summer. After watching some YouTube videos all night, I was reminded of this and thought some people might get a kick out of this. I'm a waiter at one of the nicest restaurants in my hometown. I'm pretty personable and always end up striking friendly conversations with my tables. I have 1.5 million stories about people who were seemingly very friendly but ended up stiffing me on my tips. But this is r/malicious compliance, so I'm going to tell you why you shouldn't be a jerk to your server until after you receive your food. It's a beautiful day and the restaurant is on the water. Every nice day is absolutely packed. My restaurant does not take reservations of any kind ever, so people have to go in person, request a table, leave, then come back later to eat. Normally, locals understand and expect this. There is no problem. But we are a tourist town. When newcomers try to get tables, there is always trouble. This is important in a second. Now I am swamped. I have had my section full for the entire day and hadn't had time to go on a single 5-minute break since the start of my double shift at 10 a.m. It's now around 6 p.m. A couple lands at one of my tables in a corner and they are already upset because they had to wait to get a table after a new girl had tried to take a reservation for them over the phone and they had to be called back and told they had to come in to reserve a spot. I nod to them, acknowledging that I see them after I notice them glaring daggers at me as if to say, get your butt over here right now. I was dealing with a particularly crabby table at the time. Any server reading this will know the type. Every freaking time you come back, they need something else. They ask for ketchup, you bring ketchup. Then once you're back, they ask for refills on drinks. You run and do that, and then they need salt, and they want to order more food and blah blah blah. Now at this point, there are two things you need to understand. One, they had sat around waiting for a table for over an hour before being sat. And two, our restaurant has food runners. For those of you who aren't familiar with this, it's a group of high school kids that for around 6% of all tips a restaurant receives will take care of running your food to your table for you. Now, I was also the only person that treated the food runners like human beings instead of pack mules. Because of this, my food runners were very well organized and would happily help me out when I was swamped. A food runner had gone to my table, offered them water, brought them silverware, and told them I would be over shortly. 5 minutes later, I roll up and start my speech. Hello, my name is Gray, and welcome to the restaurant. Sorry for the wait, as you can tell, I am really busy, but the man cuts me off. What's your name? He asks condescendingly. Gray, I reply. Gray, he starts up again. Why is this the first time you are coming to the table? We've been here waiting for over 45 minutes. They had literally gotten there no more than 8 minutes ago and thought I hadn't noticed them walking. You are by far the worst waiter I have ever seen. You should have greeted us and walked us to our table. Another lie, as I saw the hostess do this like she does for every other person that eats here. Now, I was already having a bad day and I was on my second part of a double shift that I knew would go well past midnight, so I was having none of it. This guy goes on to insult my posture, my accent, my clothing, I am wearing a uniform by the way, and a myriad of other things. At this point, I'm staring straight through him, not listening to a single word. Finally, he says, "We want another server. Now, you should be fired for your incompetence." I smile. He would not have asked for that. He basically just gave me the green light to screw up the rest of his evening. I am friends with everyone in a restaurant. When I have a request, it can usually be handled almost instantly. But this time was going to be different. I walk to the hostess's table and see one of my best friends, let's call her Emma, crying under the counter. Emma is a 4'6" adorable Hispanic girl who is 20 years old. She was just a tiny little thing and she needed a steep stool to address people at the front desk. She had a cabinet that she could literally sit in and take naps, and she was in there crying. I gave her a big hug and asked her what was wrong. She said a couple had chewed her out for 10 minutes straight, but how terrible she was. And guess who it was? My freaking table. I asked her if she wanted some revenge, and she said hell yes. I told her to take as long as she could, but apparently I was not good enough, and they wanted a new table. She smiled. She knew what was going to happen. I told my water buddy, John, that Emma was going to send him a table in an hour or so and went back to work. That couple watched 3 tables sit down, order their food, eat, pay, and leave before they even got to order. They sat and wanted the entire time just to try and stick it to me. The look on their faces as I happily and efficiently took care of all the tables right in front of them was just priceless. Since they were not my table anymore, I did not visit them once. After they were moved, ate, and left, I asked the waiter that took their table how they were. He said they were very polite and patient with him. I think that will be the last time they treat waitstaff so